All Elite Wrestling is 1 year away from their contract expiring with the Turner Networks. Let's be real, there are a lot of things that they need that they still don't have. Everything wrong with AEW starts and stops with Tony Khan. It's not a talent problem, it's not a network problem. Every bad characteristic you can point out about AEW either has to do with how the way AEW has been set up or decisions that he either has or hasn't made. And don't worry. He's not the only guy in wrestling that has made bad decisions as of late. Triple H is by no means half the leader Vince McMahon is, and his time will come soon. So here are 10 things that AEW still doesn't have. This I feel ties into one of AEW's worst decisions from the start. They focus on trying to be the exact opposite of WWE, and they forget the WWE formula is why they've been in business for over 50, 60 years. Back in the territory days, there were lots of opportunities for wrestling promotions, but the success was few and far between. The reason why Vince's promotion was able to stay on the air was because he produced it more like a TV show and less like a wrestling show. Kinda like Nintendo and how they managed to break through to children in the 80s. Video games were banned in stores, but they were able to market themselves as a toy company, thanks to Rob the Robot. Anyway, so long as you're on TV, you need to use scripts. Even reality shows run on scripts or else the show isn't even entertaining to watch. With a script, you make sure the purpose of your promo is fulfilled and it advances stories along well. Sometimes you can have people like Britt Baker cut a promo every week talking trash to other wrestlers, but there is no point to them. They don't create a story or lead to anything significant. I understand that sometimes wrestlers don't want to use scripts. Ric Flair and DDP preferred being able to think of their own promos in WCW over having to use a script in WWE. But not every wrestler is Ric Flair or DDP. It's like Tony Khan just got his opinion from one guy who doesn't like scripts and came to the conclusion that this one guy reflects the entire business as a whole. Many people either forget what they're gonna say, or they have no idea what to say, or they forget about the most important things to say to further the story. Scripts are meant to help with this. Movies and TV shows use scripts, so AEW would have greatly benefited from them as well, and not appoint writers to provide them as asinine. They're needed to help develop the character. Okay. Let me rephrase that. Established characters. Characters with personalities, goals, likes and dislikes, and so on. Tony doesn't believe in characters. He believes in wrestling, and that's a mistake when your goal is trying to draw in casual viewers. If you don't believe in character development, what's the point of even having a TV deal? Just book indie shows in Jacksonville and don't risk your father's money. At the start, you did have some semblance of characters. Different people were booking different parts of the roster, and you had mixed results. The mistake here was allowing wrestlers control over their own characters. Because either the wrestlers don't want a character, or the ideas they come up with are just so off the wall bad that they shouldn't even make it to TV. Then, Tony Khan somehow managed to make this concept even worse. He eventually stripped his EVPs of these duties, and what you get is a guy with no vision or interest in developing characters overseeing his entire roster. Tony believes that viewers are just going to be loyal to his brand, no matter what wrestlers are booked each week. WCW had a large roster, but you still had a core group of characters that appeared every week on Nitro, if not on WCW Saturday Night. You had Harlem Heat, the Steiners, Rey Mysterio, Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Alex Wright, William Regal. There was still a commitment towards building a pay-per-view card every month, and not just showcase the NWO and the main eventers. Viewers gradually tuned into Monday Nitro because they were able to discern wrestlers that were favorites to them and see where their stories would take them. It's not like that with AEW. You're lucky to see a specific wrestler on Dynamite 6 times a year, and that has to do with not just the overcrowded roster, but how Tony Khan uses the roster and tries to treat everyone as equals. This gives you little to no room to market. Larger-than-life characters are vital to a wrestling promotion. They help the company make more money and draw in more fans. It's not enough to just take whatever you can find from WWE's dumpster and call it a day. If I'm not sure I'll get the chance to see who it is I want to see, I won't buy a ticket, and with the underwhelming ticket sales as of late, I'm sure other people feel the same way. Clearly there has been a foundation here for a successful wrestling promotion. You can pick out several members of the roster and go, these guys could really make AEW succeed if they were just marketed properly. The cowboy hangman Adam Page? The wannabe tough guy Sammy Guevara? The hip-hop tag team The Acclaimed? The masked tag team The Lucha Bros? The alien Chris Statlander? The Muerde Lady Thunder Rosa? You have a lot of people that have great concept for characters, but they do nothing and say nothing to sell the illusion of it. Take Jungle Boy and Luchasaurus for example. Why do they have caveman and dinosaur gimmicks, and why did Tony Khan decide to make them a tag team up until recently? To tell a story? No. To entertain kids? No. To season them for bigger and better things? Apparently no. The only reason they were a tag team is because Tony Khan saw a connection between a large wrestler with dinosaur makeup and a smaller guy who calls himself Jungle Boy. They do not act in any way like the characters they are supposed to portray. They keep telling us how Jungle Boy is supposed to be one of the 4 pillars, but it doesn't seem like he's been put in that position based on anything he has accomplished, along with Darby Allin and Sammy. If you're really trying to make an effort to get Jungle Boy over, you need to put him on path for his character, whether he's just going by his nickname or he's really trying to be a man of the jungle. So far, he basically has no character and is just a Jungle Boy by name only, with his only rival as of late being Christian. A fully fleshed out character is able to tell a story well, provide entertaining rivalries with other wrestlers, and make the product more intriguing to watch overall. If a character is capable of doing that, then they are marketable. There certainly were opportunities to make other characters marketable. But to make marketable characters, you need planning. You need to give them goals, promos, and a reason for them to show up on TV every week. It's not enough to just have Mark Calloway come out in a leather coat and call him The Undertaker. The character took a lot of effort from writers and producers to come up with the character as well as coaches to help Calloway bring it to life. Needless to say, this never happens in AEW. If we've learned what kind of marketing expert Tony Khan is, it's like he would take a $5,000 bottle of white wine and pour it all down the drain just because he prefers red wine. And here's a good example of just that. It's not that the alien character was proven to fail, but rather no effort was given to make the character work. So Tony's bright idea is to get rid of her unique marketable gimmick and make her just like every other wrestler in the locker room. Her face says it all. Over-the-top characters are a big risk, but when done right, they can be proven to be very valuable assets, and Vince McMahon had a hand in making handfuls of them. Even though we all knew what kind of wrestler The Undertaker was, less people remember him from his work rate and athletic abilities compared to his persona. Nobody in the 90s bought a ticket to a WWF event saying, "I hope The Undertaker puts on an extraordinary circus act for us." After the angle with the Nightmare Collective dissolved, there was no story, there was no plan to move from point A to point B. The only thing she had done was be part of a revolving door of challengers for a champion's belt. Tony Khan and AEW management simply couldn't bother to offer her the attention to detail the WWE and Vince could afford to give characters like The Undertaker. So the roster is not failing Tony Khan is failing his roster. Tony Khan does not plan. He gives himself 3 months to put together a pay-per-view, and it's cobbled together at the last minute every time. He'll book a big championship match 2 or 3 weeks from now on free TV, but when you count on people to give you money for your pay-per-views, that is too much for him, apparently. Even with individual episodes of Dynamite themselves, there is no direction or thought put into how the show is structured. Tony Khan is laser-focused on the wrong things when it comes to managing his TV show. He doesn't care about putting on a quality product, instead he'll just do whatever he can to boost ratings in a very blatantly ridiculous way. Tony Khan just signs a new star that was released from WWE for no other reason than to boost the ratings for that given week. Don't believe me? The ratings was all he bothered to talk about after Toni Storm's debut. Storm coming in did really well for us. It's funny, sometimes people look at the quarter hours. Toni Storm and the Bunny did great. That was a great rating, over 1 million people were watching. And in the demo, it was over 500,000, it did great. It was up there with the big segments on the show, it did really well. There's a ton of interest in her. Yada yada yada. Your viewership data is not what TV audiences care about. They care about being entertained. How do you plan to entertain them? What will happen after that week? Business as usual. Ratings would go back down because there is no plan for most of these people that are brought in. Tony Khan just buys them like expensive collector cards and then keeps them on his shelf indefinitely. The crux of AEW's intrigue is not storylines, but who is next to debut, or a huge announcement Tony Khan will make that turns out to be meaningless in the long haul. It's been a year since he announced on live TV that he purchased Ring of Honor. Dixie Carter, when she managed TNA, would do this too. Make special announcements in order to get fans to tune in. But when it comes to matches, Tony Khan will give away all kinds of gruesome matches for free. Ladder matches, blood and guts, gimmick matches, matches with all these weapons. These are the kinds of matches you build up towards PPVs. They're not meant to serve as typical wrestling matches you're expected to see every week. And people have gotten injured from these matches that were pre-taped for dark. They don't tell stories, they don't help characters get over, they're just what Tony wants to see and use as a means to get more attention. Tony Khan is absolutely oblivious. I saw someone say this match is unnecessary. What does that even mean? You say it's not a way for people to watch TV anymore because every match has to have some kind of story to get into it. Exactly. Well, what about the story that everyone wants to be the best? That's how most sports are, and there are storylines going into games and matches. You're not a real sport. Sports exist in the real world. AEW is your make-believe world. Who cares about your make-believe world if you don't create any intrigue for it? People watch and go to your Jaguars games because the NFL has a team that represents their city and they want that team to succeed. 99.5% of your audience has no attachment with your wrestlers, so you need your wrestlers to pique the interest of your fans in other ways than performing. You're not a sports organization. You're an entertainment company, so your focus needs to be entertainment. With proper direction, the audience tunes in and stays tuned in every minute every week. A typical 2-hour show will have 3 major angles or matches each at the beginning, middle and end of shows. Tony Khan will decide to book his biggest angles at the beginning or in the middle of shows, and he'll book a main event that's not worth sticking around for, such as a tag team match or a gimmick match with no stakes in them. When this usually happens, viewership dips nearly half from when the show first starts out. It's not good because the ratings could be much higher, but Khan does not make an effort to plan a show properly. If he cared for direction, it would help with show structuring, since he could use major developments in storylines to act as cliffhangers so that fans could look forward to next week. Jade Cargill had been doing nothing with her championship for months. They held off on doing anything with her until AEW went to Canada again so that Taya Valkyrie could debut. That's a poor use of your company's time and your talent. You should be producing storylines for all your marketable stars all the time. You have too many wrestlers? Well, you certainly can do something about that. It doesn't make sense to want to sign all this talent while at the same time booking 20-minute matches every week. Longer does not always mean better. Sometimes, a 20-minute match can be rather boring and you just can't wait for it to end so the next segment can happen. The Attitude Era had a lot of short matches, and because of this, they've been able to give themselves more time for other storylines. That is how you can put people that don't have matches on the show, and they can continue their storylines and build towards the pay-per-view. Tony Khan doesn't limit or control. The main thing he won't limit is who is on his roster. He is approaching 150 talents on his roster and only produces around 4 to 5 hours of weekly programming, including the new Ring of Honor show, which there was absolutely no demand for. He keeps signing talent he doesn't need and then creates more shows he doesn't need in order for the talent to get paid. Wouldn't it just be easier for you just to let the people you don't want go? Keith Lee only had a total of 9 matches on AEW Dynamite this past year. 9. Then let's compare that to someone like Mustafa Ali. Ali had 19 matches on Raw in the past year, which isn't bad for an uncharismatic jobber that Vince could have easily released long ago. Case in point, you can't push everyone. It's an unfortunate reality, but part of making stars out of wrestlers involves cutting back on talent or choosing to sign wrestler A over wrestler B rather than sign the whole alphabet. It's not just who Tony Khan signs, but also what he allows his wrestlers to do. Steve Austin was as big as he was during the Attitude Era because he was the only one allowed to do Steve Austin things. His promos were profane, and he flipped the bird on other characters he had contempt for. That's how he stood out, and that's how he was able to draw the buzz that he did. Fast forward to today, where half the roster tries to be like Austin. Who is getting over with profanity or middle fingers? The broaden the question now. who is getting over by wearing black gear and leather jackets? Or black metal entrance music? Or table spots, or bleeding, or whatever you see on a consistent basis that you feel has no reason to. From the presentation to the matches, there is very little variety on AEW's products. When there's variety among a wrestling roster, it's easier for audiences to acquire a taste. It's not one size fits all. Tony Khan might expect every AEW fan to like any wrestler that walks through the curtain, but none of them stand out enough to catch the attention of casual viewers unless the viewers have known them from watching WWE, like Chris Jericho and Jon Moxley. That is a problem. Touring is necessary for more reasons than you think. Touring actually would greatly save the company money by simply just driving from one city to another without needing to fly each week. But the lack of touring hurts AEW in another major aspect. There is no bonding. Without touring, wrestlers just fly from wherever they live to the tapings, then go back home. This is horrible. You need these wrestlers to be able to spend time together outside of AEW programming. Because that's how they're able to learn how to work with one another. Because all these wrestlers are flying in from different parts of the world just for one match at a time, they have very limited time to work together before they have to do a match, and that clearly isn't enough time. The quality for a lot of matches in AEW has suffered simply because AEW either doesn't tour or they don't have a home base where wrestlers can train with one another every day. WWE does it. Impact does it. WCW and ECW used to do it. There's no coach or trainer they can hire that can provide in-ring chemistry. Sloppy matches happen more often than they should. Blown spots happen more often than they should. Injuries happen more often than they should. And this will come back to haunt Tony Khan sooner than later. TBS and TNT executives are looking at the product and going, was that supposed to happen? Because imagine if a scripted show on TNT like Supernatural had an episode where you'd see at least 3 or 4 different botches in its action scenes. The plug would be pulled by the end of the season because these mistakes are the only thing that people would be talking about regarding the show. It is one of the worst kept secrets in wrestling that Tony Khan is colluding with the wrestling media. Tony Khan and many so-called reporters are working together in order to help AEW get more traction. It's like our government and the mainstream media today. They validate him as a booker, and in turn, he validates them as journalists. They will treat AEW with complete kid gloves, while almost every story about WWE will have a negative spin on it. Dave Meltzer, Andrew Zarian, Sean Ross Sapp, Cassidy Haynes, and certainly a handful of others take orders from Tony Khan on what to report and what not to report. If Tony Khan has a scoop, such as the time he got a hold of Bryan Danielson, he'll give the information to these reporters in a way that would get wrestling fans excited for an upcoming episode of Dynamite or a pay-per-view. Wrestling journalism certainly hasn't had a bright outlook for a while now, and I get that it's easier to be an AEW shill for a ton of money more than finding a new line of work if it keeps the lights on. But at the end of the day, it does barely anything for Tony Khan. It just hurts his trust with fans because rather than earn his credibility like Vince has done, he has to buy it. And it doesn't stop with just posting stories. He'll only let his favorite reporters into press rooms during press conferences where they're only allowed to ask him softball questions. This is basically just him proclaiming himself as king as these journos act as his subjects to feed him grapes. This is all a part of a charade that Tony Khan can do no wrong. He will not allow journalists to give him hard questions. Ariel Helwani, who is a very prestigious MMA journalist, wanted to interview Tony Khan after the CM Punk stuff at All Out. All Tony Khan was interested in talking about was promoting his brand despite more important matters that Ariel wanted to talk about. Tony wouldn't give him anything regarding CM Punk, not even answers to questions like, what have you told the locker room? How will the company learn from this? And what do you plan to do so that this doesn't happen again? And then when Ariel appears as a fan on an episode of SmackDown, Tony got all but hurt on Twitter because he was a journalist that couldn't be bought. And while on the topic of social media, AEW will go after videos shared on YouTube and Twitter if they paint the company in a negative light, and this is thought policing at its very core. This is what happens when you know your product deserves the criticism that it does. Tony Khan is not a leader. People always seem to forget this about Tony Khan, but he did not launch AEW, nor was he involved when the company managed to secure a TV deal with TNT. His father gave him the money to start it. And AEW was able to secure a TV deal because the executive in charge at the time was a fan of pro wrestling, that being Brett Wheats. So his dad is filthy rich, and the person responsible for green lighting shows wanted wrestling. And just so you know, the executive is no longer there. So, these two pilots got this plane off the ground, and once they gave this kid with no experience the controls, yeah, needless to say things aren't going well. This guy who has no real-world experience is suddenly making this company's biggest decisions. This guy does not have the skills needed to lead. He does not know how to manage, finance, market, or strategize. He has never learned how to do any of those things. He's just so fortunate that his father is Shahid Khan. So it's no surprise that AEW is in the spot that it's in. Simply watching wrestling all your life doesn't give you the credentials of a Vince McMahon. McMahon was not a freeloader. He was a businessman that could market things well, and he applied that to his father's promotion, while also learning how to be a commentator and ring announcer. It took Vince 14 years to get from earning his degree to buying his father's company. Tony Khan wants to manage his own wrestling promotion, but without ever proving himself first and starting at the bottom. So he never was in an environment where he had to learn and grow, and nobody that has gotten that experience before is in charge. And what we get now is a fanboy that makes fanboy decisions. And not a businessman that makes business decisions. He does not have the acumen to do anything necessary to help his company. He does not see his wrestlers as assets, he sees them as property, and that's why they don't respect him. That's why there are no consequences for committing assault backstage. He does not put his best foot forward, but rather wants to still be a kid at heart that doesn't want to make sacrifices for the better of his business. There is no leadership. For more information on how Tony Khan is a terrible leader, click the link in the upper right corner and watch the video. AEW is not growing. Over 3 years later, they got moved to TBS. They run shows in gradually smaller venues than before. Their video game still has no release date as of this writing, and they yet to even have a physical headquarters. They still use the Jaguars Stadium as their address. Some might argue, no, they are growing. They're getting more programming from the Turner networks. But why now? Because Warner Bros. As a whole is looking to clear billions of dollars in debt still, and TNT and TBS have cancelled a lot of original programming. This means they have a blank slate pretty much when their sports programming is not airing. Considering that AEW can produce its own content, they want programs that can fill time and cost next to nothing for the Turner networks. So AEW All Access is being done in place of Power Slap. And Tony Khan is filming this new show on his own dime, so TNT won't even be paying for it. So it begs the question, why would Tony Khan expect the Turner networks to want to pay for it later when they get it for free now? That just doesn't make sense. Warner Bros. Didn't even want anything to do with Ring of Honor. I don't get why Tony Khan would buy this company only to pay for shows out of his own pocket. He really thinks that Warner Bros. Would bend over backwards to do whatever he wants them to do, despite trying to cut costs. Well, now the show is on the other foot. Tony Khan will do whatever now to please his masters, even if it doesn't result in a rights increase. If Warner Bros. Offers AEW a new TV rights deal, it's certainly not going to be an increase from $45 million per year. Either they get no increase or they'll let their contract expire, and they'll look for programming that is even cheaper. It's irrelevant to even bring up ratings, since TNT sees seasonal hockey as a higher priority than AEW. The reason that NHL was brought on board is because it makes ad revenue, even with just 200 to 300,000 viewers a week. You see how TBS is touting that Dynamite unrealistically gets 4 million viewers weekly. Okay. That's not accurate, and I have to ask, why don't they want to tout the accurate numbers? It makes you wonder.